This is the Filmcast review of Infinity Pool. I'm going to read the plot summary of this movie from IMDb. James and M. Foster are enjoying an all-inclusive beach vacation in the fictional island of Latoka when a fatal accident exposes the resort's perverse subculture of hedonistic tourism, reckless violence, and surreal horrors. End quote. Pretty good summary.
Another movie about that.
That old chestnut. A friend of the show, listener, patron named Scott shared this message with me and with the Slack Filmcast. Quote, "Man, my wife really did not like Infinity Pool. She said it was the worst movie she'd ever seen. She even said every second of it, taken individually, was the worst second of a movie she'd ever seen. And she was embarrassed for the director and every member of the audience." End quote.
Wow.
Here's my question for you, Devindra Hardawar.
Not a fan.
Here's my question for you, Devindra Hardawar. Was it that bad?
Agree or disagree?
Agree or disagree?
Yeah, how bad was it is what you're asking. No, I freaking love this movie. Like, this movie is strange. It is unusual, but I think it taps into the same thing that Possessor Uncut did, where it is sort of an exploration of the loss of yourself and your ego and the sort of like things that break down if you looked at the world a little differently, right? Like, what if the rules of society didn't apply to you? What would it make you act like? What if the rules of God and nature were just, you could just like skip them because you're rich enough to do that? And what would that do to you? What would that do to your character and your soul? I think this movie is fascinating. It's not the easiest watch and it's not for everybody, but I kind of maybe I'm a sicko, maybe I felt like the sicko meme, the guy at the glass just going, yes, watching this, because this movie is very much that. I think it is fascinating to see Alexander Skarsgård go from being the Northman, like a freaking Adonis of a human being, to here being a pathetic man, a lowly little useless man, and to see Mia Goth, who is on a tear. I have not seen Pearl yet, but I cannot wait to see Pearl because I pretty much have loved everything she's in.
She is so good in that movie. And actually, it's we didn't mention that during our Oscar segment, but like it is a shame she wasn't nominated. Yes. I didn't really think she had a chance, but she was so good in Pearl. She was amazing in that movie. So
I would like to point out that Skarsgård is still an Adonis in this movie.
Still an Adonis, but also
points, he's still an Adonis.
Like a little sad man. Like he has no sense of self, basically, because he's a kind of a failed author. He's mooching off of his rich wife, and as a man, he does not feel like a man. Whereas the Northman, he lived by code. He had 3 lines that he repeated to himself that made him strong. This man, not strong. Not strong at all. Also,
this man not strong.
This man not strong. Would also like to point out, like, Alexander Skarsgård still has the best IMDb profile photo, like him in a tux top and no pants. And I feel like that is the energy he's kind of bringing this. Like, he's a little silly in this movie. He's a little unhinged. Mia Goth is fully unhinged. And she is so entertaining. Like,
she's so
that's
good.
The thing. Like, you're either in it for Mia Goth waving a pistol around and shouting "James" like a freaking like one of the characters from the Warriors, or you're not. Right? Like, you were in a vibe for this movie, or you're not. And I was very much in the vibe for this movie. I adore this movie. I've been reading a bunch of reviews for it, and it's pretty mixed, but it is generally well liked. And somebody pointed out, like, I think David Cronenberg was always great about the he explored the body, right? The dissolution of the body, how the body breaks down, how it's all connected. Brandon Cronenberg exploring the breakdown of your soul. And I think that is fascinating. So yeah, I liked it. Not the worst movie I've ever seen. Probably one of the best like viewing experiences I had this year. So,
how are the individual seconds for you though?
They felt them. They felt real good. The way they like strung together one after another, I really enjoyed them.
Wow, the way they were like in sequence, like consecutively, that was a strong point for you. Jeff Kanata, I am so curious.
I'm sorry, Jeff. I'm sorry we
what you thought of. For those who don't know, Jeff is the one of us that out of the 3 of us, Jeff likes horror movies the least, and the fact that we've been reviewing horror movies nonstop on this podcast.
I would not even call this a horror movie, but I guess it kind of fits in.
It's
there.
A horror movie. It's a horror movie. But anyway,
what's the difference between a horror thriller and just a very violent thriller and a horror movie? You know,
very little.
I don't-
Is Saw a horror movie? You know, like
It's true.
People call
this
Saw a
is-
horror
True.
movie, but yeah.
I think this is the most horror movie we've reviewed.
It's definitely existential horror. It's definitely horror. About
Compare this
humanity.
to Sick. That's like a slasher movie. But I was never scared in Sick. You know what I mean? Whatever. I mean, not that.
All
I
right.
was,
Well,
whatever.
Jeff Canada, what did you think of Infinity Pool?
Well, Dave, I guess you could say what I thought of Infinity Pool is best summed up in the form of a limerick. Like a real infinity pool, dip into this movie and you'll think by the end you will comprehend where it goes, but no, it's just cruel.
Wow. Okay. All right.
I did not hate this movie. I did not.
Awesome.
I thought this movie was fascinating, like Devindra.
Mm-hmm.
I wish it had more meat on the bone.
Yeah.
I wish
yeah.
it landed somewhere.
Yeah.
Because it has some fascinating ideas that it seems completely uninterested in pursuing. It is a movie that I think is more. It feels to me like this movie gets sidetracked into all of the body horror, psychological horror, mess you up and show you things that are so disturbing that it loses the thread for me. But the thread was really interesting. Like the hook of this movie. I did not know going in that there are some sci-fi elements to this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And the central concept around which the plot revolves is really so strong and interesting.
Yep.
And one I wanted to see explored more. This movie is not interested in that. It doesn't care about that.
That thing, which we will talk about in spoilers, also raises some interesting questions about this poor island.
Well,
Country.
Tons of questions. But like the movie doesn't care about any of that.
You would
the
not
movie
be
is
poor if you were able to do that. But
yes,
okay.
right.
Okay.
And if you could do that, you would use it for this purpose. You're thinking very small. You're thinking very small. But I don't even care about that. I mean, the movie yada 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 is that, right? It doesn't, and that's not even my issue. Like I'm fine with just going, okay, the given circumstances are you can do this and we're going to use it for this. I'll suspend my disbelief for that. But I then would like you to kind of follow that pathway a little bit more. And this movie gets you sort of for me, I only speak to myself. It brought me into enough where I was like, I'm invested in this. I kind of care about these characters. I'm drawn into the drama, the sort of everyman, what would you do in this situation questions that it asks? Because there's a lot of that. There's a lot of, I mean, the central, the plot description that Dave read, like the central violent act that is the inciting incident of this movie is a very interesting what would you do situation, right? I'm invested. I'm completely invested in that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I love this movie? I think I might. It's fascinating. But then it just completely, I think it completely frays and loses the thread of its own tale. And it gets into this just like, okay, it's all chaos. And then where it ends up, I found completely unsatisfying.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I tried to draw the metaphor in my limerick of an infinity pool. It's like you get in the infinity pool, you're like, wow, where does this infinity pool go? Oh, there's no point.
Nice.
And that's kind of maybe that's the metaphor the movie's going for. I don't think so. I think it fails, in my opinion, to be greater than the sum of its parts, to be more than just each second. I do not agree that each second is vile or bad. There's a lot of stuff in the movie that I think is gratuitous and unnecessary in the sense of like
there's a couple seconds in the middle that are really interesting.
I guess they're unnecessary ultimately. Rating. But it definitely makes me feel icky. It definitely made me feel gross. It's definitely lots of stuff that I turned my head away from it at certain moments of like this. It's so off-putting. And that would be okay, honestly, if that was in service of something I felt grander. Because I was with this movie, and if you want to bring me to that place of kind of gross, disgusting self-reflection, I was willing to go there with it. And to a certain extent, I did. But ultimately, I just didn't feel like it was in service of something that I took away from the film as being really substantial.
I think I almost completely agree with Jeff's review on this one.
Wow.
I thought the first 30 minutes of this movie, I was like in awe. I was like, this is like one of the greatest movies I've ever seen in my entire life. I was like so on board. I was like, oh, I'm so happy I'm watching this. I'm so happy we're reviewing it. This is amazing. Brandon Cronenberg's a genius. I was like, every part of this is so good. I just love the way the movie looks. Like it's shot in a sort of bigger aspect ratio than many of the movies that doesn't make any sense. Like taller aspect ratio is what I meant to say, right?
Yep.
Like where a lot of movies are shot like anamorphic, where like super widescreen. This one is like the characters' heads fill up the entire screen in a way that they don't typically when you go see a movie. And I love the way it was shot. I love kind of the premise. And one of the things that I think the Cronenbergs do really well is practical effects. You know, they understand the power of doing things in camera. Hey, there's a guy in like Crimes of the Future that has this like weird chair that like rocks back and forth. Let's go out and build the chair for real.
You know,
like
you get to see how it reacts to the human body. Yeah.
We have a place where we're going to execute someone that looks like extremely has like cross lattice work, you know, framework on the roof. Like, let's go out and find a place that looks like that or build it. Like,
step in the goo. Step in the goo
like,
for real.
Yeah, like step in the goo, you know, like, oh, do this. You know, do this for real, you know, like there's all this kind of amazing practical work. I was just like, this is amazing. And then I think it really loses steam by the end. Like the ideas that it's exploring in its first half to me are way more interesting than the ideas it's exploring in its second half.
Agreed.
But the thing is, it started from such a strong position that even though it fell down quite a bit, I still ended up really liking the movie overall. You know, like I'm like, what a worthwhile, interesting experience. I'm glad I had it. But it could have been like, oh wow, this is my number one movie of the year already.
Sure.
2023 is over
Sure.
already. Masterpiece, and it didn't quite hit that. But still, an experience I quite enjoyed. So I think there's a lot more to discuss, but we really should dive into spoilers. Anything else before we get to spoilers? Are we good? Yeah.
Don't watch it with your family. How about that?
Don't bring a kid. Don't bring a
I
kid to
explained
this one.
at the beginning of this episode, I walked into a movie theater with a bunch of single viewing dudes, and I was like, well, that tracks.
All right, let's get to spoilers for Infinity Pool starting right now. If you are listening with children, I would say,
what is wrong with you?
Don't
for
listen
this episode?
Don't listen to the rest of this episode with children. But there is a so to answer a question that's been simmering on people's minds since we started talking about this on the podcast version of it.
By the way, I love the idea of like, gather around, children. Let's all sit around the podcast box and listen. Dave Chen and the boys is going to talk about Infinity Pool. We love going into the pool, don't you, children? All right, let's all sit down and see what they think of Infinity Pool. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, apparently, what was taken out to get this from an X or NC-17 rating to an R was there's a shot of Skarsgård climaxing.
Yep.
So you saw that, Devindra.
You don't.
I
did see that.
Well, I saw stuff landing on rocks.
You actually saw the actual thing.
Oh, shooting out?
I saw whatever they shot.
Yeah.
Of the Wang Danger? Of his Wang Danger?
Yeah, that's my understanding. That's my understanding. So not all of us were blessed.
Did you guys see Skarsgård? What he's guarding? Did you actually visibly see anything?
No.
Okay, so that was you definitely saw Mia Goth's hands around something, and those are usually prosthetic. So that was there.
Yeah.
There is in the orgy scene. There's like a lot of stuff that I can imagine they wanted to trim.
There was a 7-minute psychedelic orgy scene in this movie, basically, and they trimmed out some stuff. It was actually really funny to read in the New York Times. They're like, people in the MPAA were convinced they saw a penis. And it was actually just someone's finger, and they had to like go back and like freeze frame it and be like, "Look, it's just a finger."
There is one point where, this is a weird movie, guys. But there's one point where we're looking at a shot of looks like a vagina that basically transforms into a penis, and I think that was the finger. So
maybe, yeah. But
okay.
But what I love, I think in Possessor, his last movie, all of the stuff. The visual effects were all done like in camera. They're all done using like lighting effects and lenses. And I'm not sure if that's the case with Infinity Pool, but it seems like it certainly could have been. And there's something really cool about that. You know, there's something just really like, oh, it feels like there's an actual thing happening in front of me. It's not just all made in
the way the
computers,
light
right?
reflects off
Yeah.
of everybody, like it feels more grounded and more real.
Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking, I don't know how much of the final end, like face stomping, eyeball squishing you saw at the end, but I feel like they probably would have trimmed a little bit of that.
Yeah,
in the final
not
fight.
very much of that. Like
Yeah.
you saw him like bash the guy's face
Yeah.
in, but not really.
And
that much.
there's like
Yeah.
squished eyeball on the ground.
I don't
Like,
remember that.
I don't see
I
that
don't
in
remember
movies a lot. Huh.
Yeah. So okay, so here's some. I just want to praise a couple other things, right? I love like all the design, like all the focus on viscera and goo and like liquid, like like he steps into the thing and then he gets his double made. It's like he steps into this like gross liquid, and like when people get killed, you see it, like the camera like focuses on all their blood, and it's like Brandon Cronenberg wants you to like feel the sort of literally experience the viscera from inside people like on screen in a way that very few filmmakers do, and I appreciate that, right?
I think he does. It's even more than that, Dave. I think there is a lingering with these extreme close-ups on lots of things, not just viscera, but he'll do that with a headlight of a car. He'll do that with we get an extreme close-up of someone's mouth.
Yes,
there are these exceedingly close, tight shots of things that make you look at them in a way that just seeing them in a wider shot would not.
Yeah.
And
we're forced to witness them. That is the theme of this this episode. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, I just love the way the movie looks and is shot. And I talked about the aspect ratio, how it's like a taller aspect ratio than like anamorphic, and like it really is a vivid experience watching it in the theater. I also just love like how all the structures, in the movie, like the police station when he's taking the person to be executed, like all the stuff leading up to the double being executed the first time, I just thought was amazing.
Really
like,
well done.
Him going on to view the double for the first time, like
that moment when the double goes.
They look like they're in this like big like warehouse structure. It's like where are like just the creativity to like find all these interesting looking places. I was just like so on board with this movie.
But also the basic setting too. Like this movie feels like The White Lotus, but like really cranked up, like really on all the drugs at the same time, because it's like, you're in a resort, and like, we're gonna talk about class and privilege, and you being rich and the rest being poor, but this resort is surrounded by a barbed wire fence. Like the resort itself is like a prison.
The resort itself like felt like very plausible.
Not allowed to leave.
I also gotta say I liked also that like the fictional place was, they didn't use like they didn't use like different race of people to symbolize this other place. It was like a lot of white people. I think it was like multiracial actually, this fictional country.
It feels like one of those like things near Croatia that people vacation at now. You're like, sure, that country. Yes, I've heard of that before.
Yeah,
sure.
But I did appreciate that it was like they used like a lot of white people in this place as opposed to like othering some other group of people.
Well, I also appreciated the sort of like commentary on racism at these sort of resorts too, where it's very much on the nose, but definitely come get Chinese food at this tropical. Let's learn Bollywood dance. And honestly, I felt like some of those things were maybe unnecessary because they do distract from like what this movie is actually getting at. But
So I love just like all the design, the physicality of everything. The part where I cackled out loud was the moment when the detective hands over the urn. And he's like, here's the ashes of your double, like consider it like a souvenir. And then I literally just started like laugh. I was the only person in the theater laughing. I was like,
I laughed
that
so
is
much
hilarious.
At this movie.
Okay, so then I think it's a really interesting question. If there were no consequences for your crime, how would you behave differently? That's a really interesting question.
Yeah,
right.
You are in basically rules of normal society do not apply here. You're rich enough.
Would that change? Would you do different things? Would that change who you are, what you do? Really fascinating. And as Jeff said, the movie seems completely uninterested in exploring that, and instead just goes into kind of this, hey, be a bigger man. Like you're not enough of a man. You're kind of a weak man. Like, why can't you be a bigger man? I'm going to challenge you to be a bigger man. And that's kind of like, it's kind of like Tyler Durden, doing the scene in Fight Club where he like says you're going to be a veterinarian,
but it goes even, it is that a concept, but I think it goes even harder, right? Where you're introduced to, first of all, I really like Cleopatra Coleman in this movie, and I wish she had more to do, because she has the sort of like look of like horror compared to like what did we just experience? How can we be here? And the sort of like slow intrigue of Alexander Skarsgård's character into this world, the way Mia Goth kind of brings him in and seduces him in, but the way they break him down at the end, it's just all the realizations. Like, your book fucking sucked, dude. Nobody read your book. You little pathetic man. Oh, you thought you had fans? That's hilarious. All those little things, the way they break him down, and it's their little club, of like.
I appreciated how over the top it was, and you know the shot of Mia Goth screaming, "James, you big baby," you know, like that's gonna be like memed forever.
Yeah.
It's an amazing sequence, you know, but thematically it just isn't as interesting to me as that other stuff. I know it's part of it. It's part of like, hey, we want to unlock something in James now, right? Because you can do anything you want, so we're going to unlock this part of you. But it's like, you know,
they kind of did though, because like the what I love is like you have the final sequence. You have Mia Goth on the car, just reclining, like basically seeing her. She is the queen of this pride. Like she is. Everybody here is basically doing what her command, her presence in that scene, just incredible. And then the final bit, I think the finishing touch of this movie is they're at the airport, or they're on the bus to the airport. They're like, yeah, I think we're gonna redo the kitchen. I think we're gonna how's your family doing? That sense of normalcy, and James being like, what is happening? Like, how can I comprehend what's happening here? And the movie ends with him, basically embracing monsoon season because he just wants to. The question is, what is
he stays behind. He stays
behind. He can't leave.
Yeah. He can't leave, but also does the real world not have enough? Like, he can't make that transition anymore. I found that kind of fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask Jeff because Jeff, I think this is your first exposure to Mia Goth, right? I don't think you saw X, or you didn't see Pearl, right? So
I did not. No, she's extraordinary.
Yeah. I want to hear more about that, but I do want to say, like, you can imagine, Devindra, a movie where there wasn't Mia Goth tormenting Alexander Skarsgård character. It was just like Alexander Skarsgård like discovering for himself what he would do in this situation, right?
Sure.
And
I could imagine that. That doesn't sound as fun.
It's definitely not as unhinged and wild as this movie, but I do think it might be more thematically interesting to me personally.
Maybe. I also want to shout out A Cure for Wellness. I don't know if you saw that, Jeff, but Mia Goth was also fantastic in that. She's so good. She's so good in everything.
Yeah. So Jeff, what'd you think of Mia Goth's performance in this?
Because she's amazing. She really is. It is disarming and terrifying all at the same time. She is temptation. She is from the very beginning. You understand that she's trouble. Like, she comes up in the most sweet, lovely way, and you go,
I'm your biggest fan. Never trust anybody who says that.
Trouble with a capital T. And then the way she comes up and just grabs him and manipulates him in the center there, and it's like, wow, that is intense. And then obviously we get that ramp up into complete Looney Town. But like, I don't know. I agree with you, Dave, that the end sequence, like all of that could have, I think, landed so much more powerfully, so much more interestingly. This idea of, we bring out a version of you who's been tamed like a dog, and I'm going to ask you to kill it. And how does that scene end? He just sucks at her nipple. Like, it just felt like.
What does that symbolize, though?
Like a return to he's infantile.
He's regressing.
He is his purest form. He wins.
His purest form.
I mean, I'm sure you don't care, but I'm more interested. Okay, why of it? What is it trying to say? And like, that's it. Like, you see the Northman. You see Skarsgård from True Blood, this Adonis of a man being little baby, sucking on Mia Goth's teeth. And that image is just like, oh man, I have not seen a man like this broken down so much in a single film. He doesn't start in a really strong place at the beginning. He's sort of like, doesn't know where he is. Clearly, like, he's a little lost, but I don't know.
But what does that ultimately? What does that mean to you? Like, what does that mean for him as a character? Like, what he can't leave that place by the end. Why? What have we learned about him?
I think like it is especially that sort of, he is not able to make that switch back into normal life, right? Like, he's not going to stay there forever, but I think
he's finally free to be who he feels. He's finally feels like completely self-actualized to be who he wants to be.
but he can only do that there, and once he leaves, he has to adapt back to normal society, and I don't think he can.
I don't think he's ready. He's ready.
Yeah.
Because what does this self-actualizing mean to you? Like, do you think he wants to be the person who can do anything without repercussions?
Yes.
Or has he been, chastised enough that and betrayed by those impulses? Like, he's been completely betrayed by those impulses, right? Like. All of those people turned on him and destroyed him and beat him down and turned him into that baby. Like, why does he yearn for that? I feel like the movie is at cross purposes with itself by the end. And I don't know what to take away from it. I don't know
sort
what.
of like,
hold on. I actually, let me just, I don't know if I agree with your interpretation, Jeff, because I think that you're saying all these people tortured him. They only tortured him because he wouldn't go along with their plan, which was for him to do, to like inflict damage and wreak hell on other people like that. They wanted him to be the fullest version of who he was. And when he didn't want to go along with that, that's when they attacked him. Right. So, that's my interpretation.
That's not my takeaway from that, especially because by her saying, hey, we never liked you. We never thought your book was good. It was everything we did was a lie. I did not take away that, they want him to be this thing. My interpretation, and maybe I'm completely off base, is that he was always a plaything for them. He was never going to be one of them. He was never going to be in the club for real, no matter what he did. Yeah. Because he was always their pet, their plaything, their dog.
I think you kind of start out, I think the person they find that year, the newbie, that is who you are. And maybe the next time you go, because they've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. At the end, she's like, "Hey," she's like, "We'll see you next year," basically, right? So it's like, but I think you have a good point there, Jeff. Of like, definitely there is this kind of abuser-abused relationship between the two of them, and I don't want to ignore that. But I don't know. Yeah, maybe it is like, hey, once you go through this hazing process, then you're one of us. We've
all covered Comic-Con, and then you get
exactly
back
the same.
and you're like,
if you've never been in Hall H, it's basically literally.
I miss the hell.
The orgies are a little different, Devindra, but
they are just a little bit. Yeah, fewer anime characters.
But I felt it's like, hey, here's someone who we can like bat around, but also like maybe help this person to understand who they are a little bit.
No,
I did not get that.
I don't know that
he's an attractive, rich man. He is one of them, and he's just like, we're just helping you, buddy. Like I felt like it is a self-actualization. Sure, it involves a lot of abuse, but at the end of the day, they have another member of their club. And I feel like that, to me, that was kind of
that I kind of agree with Devindra on this. I don't think it's purely like we're just going to torture you and that's it. Period. The end. That's but
I think
who knows?
that's I don't know. Yeah. Maybe I had the incorrect reading of it, but part of why I think he doesn't leave is because he's not part of the club. He doesn't just jump in and jump out of this mode.
Well, he's certainly more mentally fragile than they are. I think is part of it. But yeah.
I don't know.
But anyway, sorry, go ahead.
I didn't view it as hazing. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe it was all supposed to be turning him into one of them. But my reading,
one of us. Yeah.
Well, my reading of the end is that you will never be. You were. The intent was never to make you one of us. We lied to you to lure you into a sense of thinking you could possibly be one. It's the, it's the nerd who gets invited to the jock party, and it was all a joke the whole time. It's like, look, the nerd actually showed up.
Yes,
you were never going to be one of us.
They're not mocking him at the end. Yeah. Like they're all like they're together.
Agreed. Yeah.
But they're not. He's in the back of the bus by himself, and they're not talking to him. I don't know. They're talking to each other, and he's
talking to each other. But
then he can't go. He doesn't go.
He does. I think the main thing is he does basically the horrible act that they were kind of pushing him to do. The thing that would really break your humanity and your soul is killing yourself, beating yourself to death. And he accomplishes that in the finale. And that to me is the entry point. That is the golden ticket to the club. So he's in. Yeah.
All right, folks. Well, a lot of strong thoughts about the movie. But
what would you do with your clones, everybody?
Dude, the idea that you could make a clone and the best thing you could think to do on it is let it die for your crimes is...
That technology should be shared with the world.
Small thinking is what I'm saying. Yeah. We need to think bigger on this one.
Indeed. Well, at the end of the day, it's really impressive that Brandon Cronenberg made a movie. Thank you so much for watching this video of the Filmcast. Check out these other videos that we have available, and be sure to hit like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to get other videos from us in the future.
You can also go to thefilmcast.com to catch all of our audio podcast versions of all of our episodes.
And support this podcast at patreon.com/filmpodcast, where you can sign up for ad-free episodes and exclusive After Darks.
Thanks so much to everyone who makes the Filmcast possible.